Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles 2024 NFL Draft Class Review, looking at all of their prospects taken based on production, athleticism, and other statistical factors. So we're going to look at all that information to kind of determine who the best draft picks were and also what their draft class looks like long term. Stay tuned until the end of the video where I reveal the overall grade for the Eagles. But all you really need to know is if you go to check out my top 50 prospects video, which is on my YouTube channel, that can kind of go over all the grading and all the different kind of stuff with this. Or you can also go to past draft class videos as well, where I go into the grading system too. But the only other things after that is we have to look at the needs for the Philadelphia Eagles. So in terms of this particular draft class, these are all of the prospects on the Eagles right now from a data perspective. NFL positional value is how they actually have performed, and then the data grade is on the right-hand side that looks at how they tested coming out of the draft. So it takes a look at production data, athleticism data, physical metrics, the team that they were on, the level of competition that they faced, how old they were. All that stuff is boiled down into one number, which is what their data grade is. So that can kind of give you a perspective on how well they're performing up to this point. Now, when you get to the offensive needs for the Eagles, the biggest needs that I identified based on data was the tight end position, the offensive line position. Those are the biggest needs on offense. And on defense, the biggest needs were the edge rusher position and the cornerback position. All of this is based on how they performed and also the age of the prospects that they have. So if you have a prospect that is older, in his 30s, that's somebody that you should consider replacing at some point, or at least having a guy in line that can develop that eventually can take that spot in the future. So that's the basics of it. But these are all the needs for the Eagles. The last factor before I actually get into the grading of them, the biggest factors in my final grade is did they meet their roster needs? The biggest needs that I identified was edge, cornerback, tight end, and offensive line. Did they draft good prospects? Because if you don't draft good prospects, you're going to be drafting more of those guys in the future. Also, did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? Based on all the work that I've done covering decades worth of drafts, the vast majority of those players typically are 70 or higher. So if a prospect has a 70 percentile or higher data grade, they have a very high likelihood of becoming a long-term starter versus prospects that are below that threshold. So it doesn't mean that a guy who scores below a 70 percentile is going to become a bust. It just means that there is a higher likelihood that that player will bust compared to a player that has a 70 or higher grade. And yes, there will be 70 or higher data grade prospects that don't make it in the NFL, but at the same time, the vast majority of them were in that 70 or higher range. So that those are the prospects that you realistically should be drafting based on data. So with all this stuff out of the way, let's get to pick 22. Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback out of Toledo. His data grade was 88.75. His floor, which is the average data grade for a prospect who scored an 88 percentile data grade, is 78.52 at pick 22. And his balance grade is 83.63 out of 100. His pick AV is 91.12. So AV is essentially the average player taken at pick 22 is 91.12. So if you just randomly selected a player regardless of position at pick 22, they would be a 91 percentile NFL player. Overall grade for this would be a B, probably a B plus if you wanted to get technical with it. Taking a look at his production traits, he has really good production. Solo tackle data is decent. Interception and pass deflection is in the 90 plus percentile in terms of these market share production scores. And athletically speaking, he had a really good 93 percentile speed score with above average explosiveness. Didn't do the short shoulder three cone though, which is a little bit of a concern. You don't really know how good his change of direction skills are. But the biggest thing that really holds Mitchell back is his adjusted production traits. His age, he's a little bit older of a prospect. He's not super young, and his level of competition was not the best either. He played at Toledo in terms of his production. So if he had played at a higher uh, strength of schedule team like Alabama or Tennessee, if he put these numbers up at one of those programs, he would have tested a lot better. He still tested really well. He tested with a high 88 percentile score. It's just that if he went to a different school, and put up the same type of production at those schools, he would have been more so in the A area. So that's the only concern with him is he does have the athleticism traits. He did have really good production at Toledo. It's just he didn't quite do that at a younger age, and also didn't do that against tougher competition compared to other players. Then, of course, we get to pick 40 and Cooper DeJean, cornerback out of Iowa. His data grade was 96.92. His floor is 70.69, and his balance grade is 83. Overall AV for this selection would be 77.22, and the overall pick grade would be an A. So based on his ceiling as a prospect, he would be a 96 percentile prospect. That's what his ceiling is, the average ceiling for him, based on his overall data, which is pretty decent. When you take a look at his production traits, he had 99 percentile solo tackle data, 85 percentile in terms of interceptions, and 63 percentile in terms of pass deflections. He's kind of the opposite of Mitchell in terms of his overall production traits, which isn't a bad thing, but these production traits are similar to like a safety more than anything else. And I know there has been talk about moving him to safety, but that's just kind of how his production traits turned out. And in terms of athleticism traits, he had an 89 percentile explosion score with a 72 percentile speed score. All those numbers are pretty much within range of Pro Bowl, All Pro areas, with the exception of the speed score. The speed score is closer to like a Pro Bowl player, but it's still a good all around athleticism traits for him. And then when you get to adjusted production traits, he had really good in terms of his pass score, which takes a look at his strength of schedule, strength of team, and those sort of areas. And he also was very, very young. He has a very good age score as well. So compared to Mitchell, he just has a better all-around profile. Mitchell does have elite speed. He does have elite pass deflection and interception data, but Cooper DeJean has just a better age profile and better strength of competition and those other sort of things. So these are both really good prospects. It's just that DeJean does have better ability in terms of projection because of his age and because of his strength of schedule and also the team that he played on. Then, of course, we get to pick 94 and Jalyx Hunt, edge out of Houston Baptist. His data grade is 76.50. His floor is 58.96 with a balance grade of 67.73. And the pick AV would be 66.02 out of 100. Overall pick grade for this would be a C. See, they got an edge rusher. When you take a look at their production traits, they had above average solo tackle, sack, and TFL data for him. When you look at his other edge rusher market share data, his forced fumbles and pass deflection data was also pretty decent. And edge rusher wise, in terms of athleticism, he had 86 percentile explosiveness with 75 percentile speed. But the only issue is his adjusted production traits. So when you look at his adjusted production, he's not really near the starter average, the all pro average, or the Pro Bowl average. And a lot of that is because of his level of competition. So he did have good production. He had good athleticism traits for the position, but the production was against lesser competition. It wasn't against Alabama. It wasn't against Tennessee. It wasn't in the SEC, the Big 12, the Big 10, any of the other bigs. It wasn't against those teams. So because of that, his data profile is a little bit lower. So he does have the potential to become a long-term starter based on his athleticism traits, but he is a little bit of a riskier pick, which is why he got a C grade. Then, of course, we get to pick 127 and Will Shipley, running back out of Clemson. His data grade is 82.62. His floor is 58.60 with a balanced grade of 70.61. And the overall pick AV would be 50.58. This overall pick grade I would give them is a B. Taking a look at his production traits, he had above average offensive, total offensive market share, receiving market share, and touchdown market share, but he wasn't really elite in any one production trait. When you look at his efficiency scores, he did have above average yards per touch, yards per reception, and touchdowns per touch. All those areas were very good for him. Wasn't elite in any one number, with the exception of maybe his TD percentage was very high. But this is kind of how he did in terms of his efficiency scores. And then when you get to athleticism traits, above average explosiveness, speed, and flexibility, but again, doesn't have any elite traits, but is within the starter averages at the position. So he has just enough production, athleticism, and all the other sort of traits to be considered a potential starter. And then when you get to the last part of the data, in terms of adjusted production traits, good age score, good MSA rating, good pass rating, all those areas make him somebody that potentially could be a starter or better, probably closer to a starter. But this was an overall solid depth chart addition player. So he's not somebody that I don't think Will Shipley is ever going to be like an elite running back at the next level, but he does everything so well that he could be a really great addition as sort of a backup rotational back. And I think that was good value for them here. Then, of course, you get to pick 152 and Ainias Smith, wide receiver out of Texas A&M. His data grade was 53.62. His floor is 40.16. His balance grade is 46.89. And his pick AV is 51.74. Overall pick grade for this would be a F. Taking a look at his market share production scores, he had above average receiving market share and above average total offensive market share with below average touchdown production. When you look at his efficiency scores, not that great in terms of efficiency. He had average yards per reception, but below average TD percentage. So he's not a guy who really gets a lot of touchdowns. That's kind of the biggest thing that really limits him overall. When you look at his athleticism traits, so this is based on his pro day, he had below average speed and above average flexibility for his size, but doesn't quite hit, the averages at the wide receiver position in terms of explosiveness and speed. Doesn't really hit that area. And then when you look at adjusted production, he's barely within the starter averages in terms of that. His age score, his MSA rating, his pass rating, all those areas are barely there in terms of the starter averages. So again, I think he's somebody who's closer to like a rotational wide receiver piece, maybe special teamer. Those types of things would kind of be the biggest things with him. But I don't think you should take a guy who has a very low chance of becoming a long-term starter here just because he does well on special teams. So that's just my personal feeling on it. They might think differently, but that's just how he tested based on his overall data. Then, of course, you get to pick 155 at Jeremiah Trotter Jr., linebacker out of Clemson. He had a 98.27 overall data grade, which is fantastic. Probably one of the best linebacker grades in this class. Based on his floor, he had a 76 percentile floor grade with an 87 percentile balanced grade. Pick AV would be 27.03, and overall pick grade would be an A. So most prospects taken at 155 usually put up 27 percentiles worth of approximate value long term. Jeremiah Trotter Jr.'s average data ceiling, I guess, the average for his potential is 98 percentile. So this was one of their best draft selections in terms of that overall potential. When you look at his production traits, he had phenomenal 95 percentile solo tackle market share, 87 percentile in terms of sacks, 91 percentile in terms of tackles for loss. Taking a look at his other market share scores in terms of forced fumbles, pass deflections, interceptions, all those areas were fantastic for him. When you look at athleticism traits, he was a little inconsistent. He had a 67 percentile speed score and a 55.4 percentile flexibility score. Didn't really go through all the athletic testing. He was somebody who didn't do all that. So he actually might be more athletic than this. But this was the biggest thing that might have dropped him, is that he didn't go through all the testing for him. He's a little bit undersized as well. And those are the biggest things that might have dropped him a little bit. But again, when you look at his production, it's hard to ignore what he did at Clemson based on his overall data. It really is. And then when you get to adjusted production traits, fantastic. Hits all the All-Pro, Pro Bowl, and starter average areas for that in terms of his adjusted production. Overall, this was a great selection for the Eagles, by far their best. He does have concerns about his athleticism, but when you look at his production, you look at his age, you look at all those other sort of factors, it's hard to see why he fell so hard. I mean, I understand the linebacker position is undervalued or overvalued, or however you want to put it. It's one of those positions that honestly teams really should be drafting more often to get really good ones, and he's one of those guys that has the potential to be really good. So I'm very excited about this selection. Then, of course, you get to pick 172 and Trevor Keegan, offensive guard at Michigan. His data grade is 71.42. The floor is 47.31, and balance grade is 59.37. With overall pick AV of 33.20, overall pick grade would be a C for him based on his data grade. Taking a look at athleticism traits for him, he had above average explosiveness with about slightly above average speed and flexibility. So he's not an elite level athlete at the guard position, but he does have enough athleticism to potentially become a starter long term. Then when you get to pick 185, Johnny Wilson, wide receiver slash tight end from Florida State. I understand he's not a tight end, but he definitely is one of those players that, based on his testing, could potentially make the switch to tight end, and that is a need of the Eagles. So this was like a sneaky tight end selection, even though he's not really a tight end, but we'll see what happens with it. His data grade is 71.16. His floor is 39. His balance grade is 55, and pick AV is 29.34. Overall pick grade would be a C. Taking a look at his production traits, he had a 46 percentile receiving score, a 38 percentile in terms of total offensive market share, and a 31 percentile touchdown score. So all these numbers are pretty decent for him in terms of his production, but not really near the starter averages, Pro Bowl averages, or all pro averages. But at the tight end position, tight ends usually you don't really care so much about production as much as athleticism and physical metrics. And that's one area that I think he might do well in. He did have good efficiency, so even though his production wasn't the best, he did have really good yards per reception score and a good TD percentage score. So even though he wasn't utilized that much at Florida State, he did get the most out of his utilization there. And then when you look at athleticism traits, fantastic. 95 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 82 percentile in terms of speed, and 90 percentile in terms of flexibility for his size. All those numbers are pretty much way above what is necessary for the wide receiver position, but at the tight end position, he might do well there because of that. And then when you look at his adjusted production traits, 39 percentile in terms of his age, so he's a little bit older. His MSA rating is above average. His pass rating is above average, but all those areas are not exactly where you want him to be 100%. Again, he's a bit of a long shot player, but based on where you selected him, based on the potential that he has, I think this is a really solid selection for them. So he's kind of a boomer bust type prospect, but I think if you were to put him at tight end or put him as sort of a seam stretching wide receiver in this offense, I think he could do really well in that area. So I'm very excited to see what he brings to the table for them long term. And then the final player to talk about is pick 190, Dylan McMahon, offensive center out of North Carolina State. His data grade is 88.78 out of 100. His floor is 47.26 with a pick AV or balance grade of 68, and then his pick AV is 25.10. Overall pick grade I would give them is a B plus. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, he was a 90 plus percentile explosion score tester with 98 percentile in terms of flexibility and has almost near elite speed. So he's 79 percentile. He's not quite in the 80 percentile area. But when you look at the center athleticism traits, the All Pro average, the Pro Bowl average, the starter average, he hits all those averages, and he is the perfect candidate to potentially be the future center for the Philadelphia Eagles. So this was a sneaky good pick for them in the seventh round, definitely for them, or at least in the later rounds, I should say. So overall, when you look at the final grade for the Eagles, I would give them an A. Did they meet all their roster needs? Yes. Did they draft good prospects? Yeah. Did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform the draft status? Yes. The Eagles did a great job tackling their needs and building depth on the roster as well. There's not much else to say. I mean, this was a great draft from a data perspective. They pretty much hit it out of the park in terms of the stuff that they needed, and they got some decent selections that, from a data guy, it makes me go, all right, they're looking at something. I don't know what it is that they're looking at, but they're looking at something that I might be looking at and trying to see if they could get something out of it. So, with all that stuff out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Jim Coburn. You can check out my other work at patreon.com/jcoburn. Also, consider checking out my ex, formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics, and consider purchasing the 2024 NFL Draft Analytics Guide available today. 678 pages worth of content in that, covering a lot of the players that I just discussed, and it will make you a well-informed fan. So whether you're an Eagles fan or any other type of fan, I think that guide will be well worth the investment to learn more about the stuff that I do in terms of grading prospects and future evaluation. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.